morning. Today I'm Mary Kennedy. I'm the new director of the Windgate Museum of Art. And we're delighted to be kicking off our programming today with Dave Loewenstein. He's been in various classes today and will be in other classes tomorrow. But thank you for coming this afternoon. It's great that you're here. Dave Loewenstein is a muralist, printmaker, and arts organizer based in Lawrence, Kansas. In addition to his more than 20 public works in Kansas, examples of his dynamic and richly colored community-based murals can be found across the United States and in Northern Ireland, South Korea, and Brazil. Loewenstein's prints, which focus on social justice issues, are exhibited internationally and are in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Yale University, and the Center for the Study of Political Graphics in Los Angeles. He is the co-author of Kansas Murals, A Traveler's Guide, a 2007 Kansas Notable Book Award winner published by the University Press of Kansas, and is the subject of Called to Walls, a feature-length documentary that premiered in 2016. In 2014, he was named one of the founding cultural agents for the new U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and in the spring of 2016, he led multiple mural projects in Brazil on a project coordinated by the Meridian Center for Cultural Democracy. I met Dave and had a chance to work with him when I was at Mid-America Arts Alliance, and we organized a program where we had murals in each of the 6 Mid-America states. And Dave traveled to each one of those communities, worked in residence for 2 to 3 months with people in that community to arrive at a mural design and then a mural production for those communities. And in Arkansas, the mural was in Arkadelphia. And I'm guessing he'll probably talk about some aspects of the controversy of that mural. But please join me in welcoming Dave.
Thanks, everybody, for coming out. I've had a really nice time here already. It was great visiting classes. Thanks to Mary Kennedy, of course, Hendrix College, the new Windgate Museum. It was interesting today. I started off in the painting class, talking to students, and Matthew, professor, and towards the end of class, we started talking about our backgrounds, and I said that I was from Chicago, and Matthew said, "Oh, really? I'm from Chicago too." Turns out neither of us were from Chicago. We're both from Evanston. This is how you do it, right? In a big city. And looking at each other, we're about the same age. And he says, "Where did you go to high school?" And I said, "Well, Evanston, ETHS, Evanston Township High School." And he was like, "You're kidding." He's like, "When did you graduate?" I said, "1984." He's like, "83." We've both forgotten about each other, whatever there was to remember, we forgot. And then later, I was in Melissa's printmaking class, which was also really a lot of fun. And towards the end of class, once again, we're talking about our backgrounds. And, I can't remember how it came up, but I must have mentioned that I was in Indiana, where I got my MA degree years ago. And she asked me, she's like, "Where in Indiana did you get your MA degree?" And I said, "Well, nobody knows that. It was Purdue University. It's not a big program for her." She's like, "You're kidding. When were you there?" And I said, I think it was like 89, 90. I think she came a few years later, 95 or something. Yeah. But we both knew the same people. So, connections already with Hendrix. I'd never been here before. A little bit I know. I like to start off with a few facts. I've mostly overcome paralyzing shyness and intense fear of public speaking, thus I'm here today. We, all of us here today, are on the traditional lands of the Caddo, Quapaw, Osage, Choctaw, and Cherokee people. It's very important to remember that. I am half Jewish on my dad's side, and I dreamed of becoming a professional baseball player until I was 17. That's actually not true. I dreamed of it until I was probably 45. I thought was the absolute cutoff. And then, of course, my team, the Cubs, won the World Series after that. The average high temperature here in January is 50 degrees, so I guess we're a little below average, but it feels great to me coming from further north. I don't have any tattoos, but my ears are pierced. It's a little personal, I guess. The Conway Confederate Monument stands on the lawn of the Faulkner County Courthouse. The east face bears the inscription dedicated to the memory of our Confederate soldiers, the bravest of the brave, erected by Robert E. Lee Chapter, number 718, UDC, October 1925. Still there. I like to collect stories about the current oldest person in the world. And my understanding from Wikipedia, so excuse this reference, is that the legend behind the name for Toadsuck Days, which I've never been to, but I heard Steve Earle played there last year, and that's amazing, is that it refers to a time when steamboats were tied up where the ferry lock and dam are, and while they were waiting for the lock and dam, the captain and crew would get out and just drink themselves silly. And I guess people would say that they suck on the bottle till they swell up like toads. I needed to know, right? Toadsuck Days. And if you didn't already know that, you should know it because somebody's going to ask. I have a 2.5-year-old son, my only child. Got started a little late, and he is my inspiration. So 30 years ago, before the internet, at least our internet, before I had any idea what I was doing, I was living in Lafayette, Indiana, Purdue University, finishing my MA degree. My future was uncertain. I could go on to get an MFA, which I talked about with students today, but at the time, I wasn't sure that I wanted to make art anymore. I wondered about what its purpose was, and who it was for, who the audience was. And I also thought about what my life would be like if I continued down that road. One night, while I was at a standstill with a painting of a place where a paved road turned into gravel, I picked up a copy of the student newspaper. It was called The Exponent. Do you remember The Exponent? I do. Okay. We'll get this story. There was an article about the university president, Dr. Steve Beering. For weeks, students had been trying to meet with him to talk to him about how to address the AIDS crisis. This is like 1989. They wanted more funding for AIDS education. But Beering, who was a medical doctor, refused to meet with them and was later quoted as saying, "Purdue doesn't have those," meaning those who might need treatment, kinds of people on campus. So there was no need for increased AIDS education. Horrible, I thought. So just like anyone else would, I made an 8-foot-tall portrait of the president, Steve Beering, in just his socks, and then put it in a campus hallway with a label that encouraged people to add their comments about him directly on the campus. And I included some Sharpies there so that people could do it. What happened in the following days and weeks changed the way that I understood art and an artist's role in society. Here's what happened. The first day or so, not much at all. There were a few comments. Then the Exponent decided it was newsworthy, and they took a photo of a student writing on the piece and published it on the front page with the president visible from head to significantly below the waist. You're seeing it there. All hell broke loose. The local newspaper came and did a story. The painting disappeared. The chair of the art department said, the chair of the art department came to me and said, "We don't make public space for personal points of view." The chair of the art department. Radio and TV stations called for interviews from the area and then nationally. I got anonymous and threatening phone calls and letters. There were letters in the newspaper. An administrator said that the university was going to press charges against me and that I would not get my degree. Low context, this was the same year that Senator Jesse Helms decried obscenity toward the work of Robert Mapplethorpe and Andres Serrano and led to their being censored. And I think that was the end of the individual grants at the NEA at the time. The president of the university, Mr. Beering, never made a comment, but many of his employees and admirers did, many faculty members. The ACLU contacted me and said they had my back. Fortunately, they were never needed. The painting was returned, the conversation continued. The exponent got scared, the student newspaper, and apologized publicly for their story that they'd done in the photograph. I was ostracized, shunned by many art faculty. I got my degree, but was encouraged to skip graduation. And I did, and I learned a lot. I learned about how Mr. Bering's privilege and his power shielded him from questions, from having to meet with students, and from being called to account. Students and others hadn't been able to expose him, but art did. I learned that art had the capacity to reveal, unmask, and make space for conversations and raise questions in public. And I also learned a new uneasy feeling that comes with the realization of a big responsibility. The understanding that once I had discovered this new approach to my role as an artist, I couldn't turn back. In her 2009 book, A Paradise Built in Hell, the writer Rebecca Solnit asks why so many people find joy, community, and a greater sense of agency and possibility in the midst of disasters or unexpected acts of nature, and why those feelings dissipate when things go back to normal. She asks the reader to set aside what we assume about disasters like 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina, and look at how in those moments of chaos and powerlessness, when our everyday routines are interrupted and government breaks down, quote, people step up, not all, but the great preponderance, to become their brothers and sisters' keepers, and to see, in that moment of true mutual aid and equity, a glimpse of who else we ourselves may be and what else our society could become. She goes on saying, quote, disaster sometimes knocks down institutions and structures and suspends private life, leaving behind a broader view of what lies beyond. The task before us is to recognize the possibilities visible through that gateway and endeavor to bring them into the realm of the everyday. And who better than artists? An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times. And at this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate and every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but get involved. Sounds like somebody said that today, but it was actually Nina Simone 30 years ago. Or put more succinctly by the filmmaker Akira Kurosawa, the role of the artist is to not look away. But how? What does it mean for an artist to reflect the times and not look away? To be a witness, an ally, a maker of one's own story, an imaginer, a truth teller, an organizer, an interpreter. To see oneself within the flow of history and consequence, and to feel connected to others who are engaged, who came before, who are threatened. To develop empathy, and maybe most importantly, to share one's own story. Not because your action will necessarily topple the current fascist regime, but because art is a rehearsal for the revolution. It's a quote from the great theater maker and later Brazilian Senator Augusto Boal, famous for Theater of the Oppressed. I don't believe all artists must be activists, but for those of us who feel the tug, if not now, when? You're needed, and you possess incredible skills and powers. Reach out to those who ask for your help, or just begin by sharing your own story in public, where it can't be hidden. James Baldwin is more specific, saying the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions hidden by answers. To lay bare the questions hidden by answers. Questions for us that might include how in this land of immigrants we can allow serial deportation of longtime residents. Our meal, our food, where did it come from? Your money. What is your 401k really invested in? Or if you're like me and you don't have one, what in your name do you help pay for when you pay federal income tax every year? These are tough questions, difficult to answer. As city dwellers, we may not have the slightest idea where our food comes from, although I think that's changing these days. There's more interest in that. As 401k investors, we may only be concerned with growing our investment, regardless of the effects our money has on those at the other end of the equation. But why do we hesitate to ask, especially when we're in public? It may be because we don't want to know the answers, or because we're expected to already know the answer. Because that's the way it's always been. Don't upset the apple carts, don't rock the boat.
But I think it's mostly because asking implies that the question is worth answering. What happens when we do ask? Well, sometimes, like a magician's illusion, in the blink of an eye, we suddenly acknowledge the elephant in the room. The emperor has no clothes, and occasionally things change. It becomes legal to marry whoever we want. More people get health care. We finally address climate change. Well, that's for the future. So I've spent the majority of the past 30 years leading community-based mural projects. It's easy to imagine that everything sort of fell into place for me with that vocation. The truth is it was mostly luck, chance, and a whole lot of false starts. But there is one story that I want to share that feels prophetic. In the early 1990s, I was in graduate school in Lawrence, Kansas, working towards an MFA, and I was really frustrated with my direction, and I ended up in the art library looking for books that might inspire me. And I'd heard about people doing public murals, public art, so I went to a section that was sort of organized around public art. And I pulled out this book. I have a copy of it here, I can show you later. And I was talking to students in class today, and I told them I would make a big reveal about this book now. So here it is. So I picked up this book. It's Toward a People's Art, the Contemporary Mural Movement. Well, at the time, I had no idea that there was such a thing. This really should be the community-based mural movement, because this is a book that traces the history of what I now feel I'm part of, the community-based public art movement. It really started in the late 1960s in Chicago with a mural called The Wall of Respect by William Walker. Their vision was associated with other civil rights struggles and was grounded in those values. And this book traces their early history not only in Chicago, but in Detroit, in Los Angeles, in New York. And it's fantastic. And I remember being really intrigued by the cover, because the murals on the cover, you can tell these are not professional artists. These are made by groups of people, probably. And that to me seemed really curious. So I started flipping through the pages. And I eventually came to this page. Right here. It's page 140. And it's, a group of students, and a teacher or an artist. There's a mural happening in the background. And I had this overwhelming sense of deja vu looking at this photograph. And eventually I read the caption at the bottom. It says, "Children and Ruth Felton, Miller School Mural, 1975, Evanston, Illinois." I think you already know I'm from Evanston. And in 1975, I was 9 years old. And I went to Miller School. And this is me right here. So here I am in this crisis moment in my life as an artist, figuring out if I can continue to make art or how. And I go to the library. This is a great case for libraries, right? So I go to the library and I pull out this book, and lo and behold, this book that looks like it could inspire me, I'm in it already. I had forgotten that when I was in grade school at Miller School, that my class worked with this artist, Ruth, on this mural in our cafeteria in the basement. But seeing the photograph, I remembered how excited and intimidated I was, like putting paint to the wall. Never having thought that, one day that would be my vocation. Well, many years later, this leads to the Mid-American Mural Project, which Mary briefly introduced. It was really, I think it was Mary's vision, actually. And she invited me to have this conversation about the possibility of doing a project. And I remember when we first talked about it, I don't know that we had landed on doing all 6 states, but I was for sure. We're going to do one, we got to do them all. So it was a 6-state region. This is where the murals ended up. So it was Hastings, Nebraska, Newton, Kansas, Joplin, Missouri, Tonkawa, Oklahoma, Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and Waco, Texas. We thought of it as sort of a pilot program that would introduce this community-based approach to design and creation of public murals in the region. We'd spend a couple of months. We'd work directly with residents on the research, on the design, and the execution of these murals for their communities. Local arts organizations, they were almost always arts organizations, made their case for having the project come to them. And it was really difficult to make the choice. And Conway was actually in the running in Arkansas, but you guys seem like you already had it going on here. So we went down to Arkadelphia. Anyways, our vision was really, I think, best articulated by a colleague and friend, the writer, artist, and activist Arlene Goldbard. When giving lectures, she often framed her comments with three questions. She would say, who are we as a people? What do we stand for? And how do we want to be remembered? And it was these questions that became our guiding sort of vision and principles as we engaged with every new community. We began in Tonkawa, Oklahoma here, a little town of about 3,000, north central part of the state. The mural that we did with residents there, after meeting in their local history museum, working on the design together, having tough conversations, working on the process of putting it together, focused around their past, including the Cherokee land run, and the effects of that kind of colonization or gentrification, use your own term, on the Tonkawa tribe. Tonkawa is named after the Tonkawa tribe, and the tribe still had a small reservation just outside of town. But it was one of these questions that, although everyone was an open secret or not a secret at all, it was an open wound, I guess you could say, and not something that had been addressed between the two communities very much, if at all. But through the process of making this mural, working with folks from town and from the tribe, we started to investigate that, along with other aspects of their history and culture. And painted together, and had a fabulous celebration where Tonkawa tribal citizens came and did a prayer song for the mural. And we created this. It's called Listening Back, Dreaming Forward, the Rhythms of Tonkawa. It was a remarkable experience and a great way to kick off this 6-day project. In fact, one of the things that I've got to say about the Mid-America Mural Project is that it was incredibly hard to leave each of the communities that we worked in. Spending 2 or 3 months with folks and not only hanging out, but actually having all these conversations about what's most meaningful to us embeds you in a way that you almost become family. And it was very unnatural for us to have to go somewhere else. And a real challenge for me as an artist to go to the next place, which in this case was Newton, Kansas, and not recreate what happened in Tonkawa, but at least present the same kind of opportunity in a new community. And that's what we did later that year. We were there, we worked. It was interesting, this project in Newton, because we got applications in Newton from 2 groups that didn't know each was applying. One came from the city of Newton, and one came from some folks at Bethel College, which is in North Newton. And if you know Newton at all, you know that these communities are right adjacent to each other, but there's some tension between them. And there's a lot of history between them. And when we went to talk to folks in Newton, we met with both of these folks at the same time and started the project in the spirit that we wanted it to be done in, by asking these 2 groups, hey, would you collaborate together? Instead of choosing the Bethel College project or choosing the City of Newton project, we said, you guys collaborate together and we'll work on this thing as a whole. And that's what we did. And props to those folks. Actually, Rachel F. Buller
is going to be your next speaker here in this series, and it was Rachel and Muller from Bethel College who made the application from North Newton. She's a great friend and great artist. I really encourage you to come in and listen to her. So this mural is called The Imagineers, and it focuses really on a group of residents from Newton who are gathered around a table, and they're engaged in the process of recalling and reimagining their community, using quilts and model railroads and board games as metaphors to explore their history and to sort of manifest new ideas. And as these new ideas come to life, they become three-dimensional. And the figures around, or the figures at the table, are surrounded by symbols from Newton and North Newton, including references to Mennonite and Hispanic heritage, wheat farming, the Chisholm Trail, and many other things. This was a celebration, or this is actually a rehearsal for the celebration that happened in Newton when the mural was finished. And the remarkable thing about these projects is they seem to spur on other artist projects, which we eventually sort of caught a hold of and encouraged later. We would expect and anticipate that other artists would want to do something. And this was a dance performance choreographed by one of our mural team members, a woman named Sarah, who wanted to be inspired by the imagery in the mural and create a community-based dance. So these are not necessarily professional dancers who got together and performed at our dedication with music and all that kind of stuff. So someone taking part in a collaborative project like this is able to have a very full and rich experience of citizenship, to be one among many whose ideas and efforts are welcomed equally, who pursue common aims in a climate of respect and affection, who together make something meaningful to themselves and the whole community. Even in a dark time, this experience foreshadows true democracy and full, vibrant citizenship. I mentioned Arlene Goldbard before. This is another just beautiful quote that I think encapsulates the vision of the Mid-America Mural Project, and I've taken to heart in just about everything they do. From Newton, the next year, we were scheduled to go to Joplin, Missouri. That was 2011. The project had been funded, organized. I had made a couple trips down there already, and we were scheduled to show up, I think it was the first week of June. And then in late May, an F5 tornado went through Joplin, and 162 people died. 5,000 homes were destroyed. Literally, like a quarter of the city vanished. And I remember having conversations with Mary and other folks who were part of the project about whether or not do we go? It wasn't an issue of funding. What we decided to do was just go down and visit, partly because of concern for our new friends that we met down there, but also because it was up to them. What do they think? What do they feel now? We went down, had a meeting at the Spiva Art Center. It was packed with people. And I presented a little bit about how we saw the project, and then just left it open for comments and thoughts. And it was remarkable, because what I recall is that that group of people, just about to a person, said they needed this project more now than they did before. That they felt this was an opportunity to do something publicly, to talk about who they are as a people, and what they stand for, and how they want to be remembered. Wow. Okay. Big, like this is adding another layer onto these neat art projects we're doing. Because this is serious business. There are people recovering in the hospital. Funerals are still going on. And we were invited to come down and continue the project. And that's what we did. We spent a lot of time with our new friends and others, understanding as best we could what they'd endured.
Some trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Your backpack's talking to you.
Are you sure it's mine? That's not
That's
mine.
my phone.
Excuse me.
How rude is
Don't
that?
blame that on me.
Sorry, Dave.
It's okay. So we spent a lot of time down there just visiting with people before we engaged in any kind of art process. Figuring out where the mural would be, it ended up being just north of the path of the tornado. And then we started our process. It really didn't change the way we went about things, which was sort of important for me because I had this feeling that in every community, the thing that could stay consistent was the way that we met and got to know each other. Other things, other factors of history and politics and all that would change, but the way that we engage with each other could be the same. And so folks from all sorts of places in town came and met with us. We worked with tons of kids. Thousands of people have been displaced who were meeting people in places that they weren't usually at, that they weren't comfortable in being. We had no idea when we first met people what impact the storm had had on them, if they knew somebody that had died or been injured. But we went on, we made lots of drawings. This is one of the remarkable things, we worked with lots of young people, and we're very sensitive to the fact that they'd experienced, some of them, incredibly difficult things. We never asked them to draw about the storm. But nevertheless, kids, because they're more honest than us grown-ups, they drew about what was in their hearts and on their minds. And a lot of times they made drawings about what happened. You're seeing a few there. A lot of the drawings that were made were inspired by the things that we saw outside, the strange new environment that people found themselves in Joplin. And then we began to paint. And the site of the mural at 15th and Main became not only a place where the mural was happening, but where people could come and talk about just how they were doing. And it was an affirmation for me, I guess, that these projects are about much more than the creation of the artworks. There are opportunities for us to create new places where people can meet and talk and share stories. This is the finished mural. It's called the Butterfly Effect. And if you look closely here in the center, one thing that we were really challenged by as we built the design was the group really wanted to reference that the tornado had happened. There were others in the community who said, don't do that, just make it all nice. But the team that we were working with said, no, we need to acknowledge this. The question was how? Do you do a literal depiction of a tornado ripping through town? Probably not. In the end, what we realized is that the most honest and beautiful depictions, evocations of what folks were going through were made by these kids. And so the drawings that you saw earlier, some of them you see here, reproduced just as they had made them and painted in large part by those same young people. From Joplin, we made our way to Arkansas. And that was exciting for me because I really hadn't spent much time here. We ended up in Arkadelphia, a town I didn't know existed, in a part of the state that was remarkable for being in the Ouachita Mountains and the rivers and the pine forest and all of that. And getting to know Arkadelphia was really cool. I mean, it's a town really proud of its universities and its education system. And that actually became the focus sort of our mural project. The mural, and you're seeing it being projected on the wall before we painted it, one of the things that's become really fun with these projects is we use projectors now, most of the time, to get the design on the wall. And we usually have to practice the night before we actually do it. And so this was the night before, and I, for a few years at this point, had been making that practice projection into an event, because every time that we had done this in the past, kids would show up, get their shadows up on the wall. They had a blast, And it was so much fun that we turned this basically into dance parties. The night before we'd actually transfer the mural. And so that's what you're seeing here. So Arkadelphia, when we were there, folks in town referred to it as the Athens of Arkansas, someplace. They were there passionate and enduring support of education. Underneath this decorative archway of soaring pine trees, there's a young student holding a symbolic pine tree on the left-hand side of the orange shirt there, as he considers his future and potential. His journey unfolds amidst references to Arkadelphia's cultural history, including Peak School, which is one of the Rosenwald schools. We can talk about that later if you want to. This is schools for African Americans before desegregation. It was very important to Arkadelphia. And we had a number of our design team members who had gone to Peak. It also focused on the Arkadelphia Promise, which was Arkadelphia is one of these communities where a local foundation has promised to fund the college education. I can't remember how many high school students, their complete college education. It also references the Hunter-Dunbar expedition, and these are all centered around this majestic figure of a woman who symbolizes education and mentorship, who lights the way towards the young man's future. And emblazoned sort of on her skirt are keys to the future. Martha Dixon, their most famous person in town, who's a fashion designer and designed dresses for Hillary Clinton and inaugurations and so on, is portrayed in the green dress there. Mary alluded to controversy that happened during this project, and I'm happy to talk more about it. I'll just mention really briefly that, because it was not uncommon to mural projects. There were folks in the community who expressed concern over the skin tone of the big teacher, the mentor figure here, saying that her skin was too dark. And it led to a really critical moment in the project where we really tested the process of community-based public art, because I had to gather together the folks that were working on this project and let them know that this had happened and ask us, what are we going to do? And they were unequivocal in saying, you have to leave it the way it is. We love it the way it is, the way she is, and we won't change it. That led to a pretty intense standoff where the media from Little Rock came down and so on. Ask me more about it later if you want to, but I'm going to move on just for the moment. Our last two murals, we went to East Waco, Texas. This is a neighborhood across the Brazos River on the east side, where Baylor University was starting to gentrify an historically African-American neighborhood. Our mural was on a branch of the public library, which had previously been their local grocery store. Now they didn't have a grocery store. And it honors the legacy of this neighborhood. It's really in three parts. There's a series of panels along the bottom, where Elm Avenue, the street we were on, Paul Quinn College, the Alpha Theater, famous artists Kermit Oliver, Doris Miller, a World War II hero, and Juneteenth, I remembered. And above that is a series of symbolic pictograms that refer to East Waco's cultural, geographic, and economic life. And the top of the mural takes inspiration from its history of being a grocery store and the use of hand-painted advertisements. So we took sort of inspiration from those old kind of hand-painted advertisements and changed their meaning to refer to things that had more to do with the library and education. Our last project was in Nebraska, in Hastings, Nebraska, in the fall of 2013. And we did something sort of interesting with this project, working alongside our mural team, who were fascinated by all the previous projects. We'd done 5 before. They couldn't stop talking about it in the process. What we decided to do was sort of pull back the curtains on the community-based mural process and show all of the different things that it takes to create one of these kinds of artworks. And so the mural itself took its title from this book. The mural is called Toward a People's Art. It's painted along the Pioneer Spirit Bike Trail. It's about 200 feet long and explores that process from the very beginning of meetings and preparing the wall to celebrating in the end. It features many of the Hastings design team members, so that's something I didn't mention, but you probably saw, is a lot of the people who work on these projects end up being portrayed in the mural themselves. And that just makes sense to me. I mean, there are other historical figures and so on, but we like to stand in as actors in our own work. There's special details that include this remarkable artist named Dave Stewart, prehistoric fish from the Hastings Museum, and renditions of this remarkable fountain they have called the Fisher Rainbow Fountain. Really a fun way to wrap up the project. And this is an example of the kind of thing that I was just mentioning, where we end up portraying ourselves. So we had one of those dance parties when we were practicing for the projection, and these two girls came to hang out as we were doing that. We're doing all sorts of funny things. Somebody took a photo, and later in our design team meeting, we asked them, and they were all about it, would you mind being portrayed in the mural? And because this mural was about the process of creation, it fit in perfectly. And so you can sort of see now how they fit into that process, or to that process of creation. It was a lot of fun for them. So during this 3-year-long project, 2 of my early assistants and 2 of my best friends, Nicholas Ward and Amber Hansen, they started on the Tonkawa mural. We're shooting footage for what they hoped would someday be a feature documentary. They had made short films before. They were both artists in their own right, really great artists. 3 years after that, Called the Walls premiered and has been touring film festivals and universities ever since. And if I can figure out how to do this, I'm going to show you the trailer for it. Let's see here. All right. So far, so good. Let's see if it works.
It has become more relevant to me now than it was 3 months ago. The highest, most logical, purest, and most powerful type of painting is mural painting. It is also the most disinterested, as it cannot be converted into an object of personal gain, nor can it be concealed for the benefit of a few privileged people. It is for the people, it is for everybody.
Partnering with people in the places they live to amplify their voices, concerns, challenges, and aspirations in a way that's really publicly accessible.
Sometimes you can look into a painting and you don't have to have all the detail, but you see what it's all about. Look at it and see it, it's 2 different things.
When I think of what we need to bring about the transformation that we want to see in the world, to a social order of justice infused with love, these 3 questions keep occurring to me. Who are we as a people? What do we stand for? How do we want to be remembered?
I was bruised and I was broken. Sometimes that's what you need. To see that all of us inside is burden that we free. And the more hands that we leave, the lighter it will breathe. But so many of us wait for someone else to take the lead. So many of us wait for someone else to take the lead. That's why I'm walking.
Anything, I think it told us that we could begin something that we hadn't ever done, that involved many, many people in the community, and we could make it happen. We completed.
We can never all that we have lost. Comes at quite a cost. This price we have is fixed, but we'll conquer.
by your actions, your choices, your words, your relationships, including your creative acts. And that everything that's been created has been imagined first, and you can be one of those imaginers who makes things happen, who makes the world.
I think available soon, probably on Amazon. I know they're just finishing up the letterbox and all that stuff. It's been at a lot of film festivals and other things. And so much gratitude to my friends Nicholas and Amber for really, I don't know what it's been now, 7 years of work on this film. Maybe we can show it here sometime. We'll see. Excuse me. So there's a dumpster in the alley near my apartment that for decades has supported a unique social space and underground economy. The way it works is simple. People leave what they want to give away, take what they need. I started a project called Give, Take, Give to explore the layers of stuff circulating through it and document the stories from people who have maintained it. And I had a question. Why aren't there more places like this? So here's an excerpt from an essay that's in the book that we produced as part of this project. There are those people who give, those people who take, and then there are those who do both give and take. These are the ones who find themselves, by choice or custom, swept into the current that maintains this small, unmoderated gift exchange. Each week the dumpster fills with our unwanted, forgotten, or slightly damaged surplus. Archaeologically inclined daydreamers, treasure hunters, and urban gleaners come to explore and reimagine its bounty. No one is in charge, there are no rules. And as my friend Kelly Nightingale says, if nobody's making rules, then nobody's breaking rules. It's anarchy until Monday when the city sanitation workers unceremoniously attach the dumpster to the back of a garbage truck and watch as it's emptied. Those of us who maintain the dumpster challenge the assumption that chaos will ensue without strictly enforced rules that govern how goods are used and distributed. The little dumpster that could, as Rachel Vaughn calls it, insists on being public, free, and relatively unsupervised. It encourages a flow of gratitude and mutual indebtedness against the prevailing current of anxiety and suspicion that has led to building ever higher fences and installing security cameras on every corner. It is cared for by a loose affiliation of those of us who frequent it and is therefore vulnerable to our misuse. In other words, there is risk inherent in trust. Whoops. The dumpster will return to being filled with garbage if we don't renew the source of its wealth. It's a temporary autonomous zone of goodwill, hidden in plain sight, which relies on collaboration and an extended network of givers and takers in order to thrive. If all we do is take and not give, it'll disappear. If all we do is give and not take, it'll become overwhelmed and unmanageable. We provide the current that moves things along. Unfortunately, this unique and fragile place has been impacted by recent real estate speculation and upscale development, and this is in my neighborhood in Lawrence, pushing into this traditionally working class space. After decades of operating in plain sight without incident, the dumpster was locked by its owners, effectively destroying its capacity to bring people together and to share resources. Alongside my community-based projects, I make more personal works that speak directly to my values and beliefs. Often, they're used in social justice campaigns and are usually found first on the street. In the fall of 2011, when I was in Joplin, Missouri working on that mural, news of the occupation of Zuccotti Park arrived like a bolt of lightning. I immediately felt a strong affinity for both its organizing process, which we call a horizontal organizing process, and purpose, which was to create basically a more equitable and caring society. And I wanted to help amplify those ideas, even if I was way out in the Midwest. It didn't take long. Friends associated with the Just Seeds Artists Collective formed something called OccuPrint,
an open source platform for sharing posters and graphics. And I jumped in. As with many of the posters I make, it was my hope that these would help spread the spirit of the movement and help inspire those involved. Visual art, like poetry and song, has great power to energize, expose, and question, and I am committed as an artist living here and now to have my work speak in service of the struggles and movements I believe in. Posters, accessible, unprecious, and direct, have always been a people's art. I mean that in the same sense as the idea of people's history popularized by Howard Zinn, who said, "Whenever I become discouraged, which is on alternate Tuesdays between 3 and 4, I lift my spirits by remembering the artists are on our side. I mean those poets and dancers and printmakers and painters and quilters and singers and novelists and playwrights who speak to the world in a way that is impervious to assault, because they wage the battle for justice in a sphere which is unreachable by the dullness of ordinary political discourse." Do you have kudzu in Little Rock and Conway? Has it made it this far north? You do. I know climate change is changing everything. So there's kudzu here? Pretty serious? Or it's coming? I know it'll be in Kansas soon. About 10 years ago, I was working on a mural project in Port Gibson, Mississippi, which is about 3/4 of the way down the state on the Natchez Trace. And I was in a completely new environment for me. I'd never spent a lot of time down there, having grown up in Chicago. And I remember having these waking dreams of kudzu, because kudzu was everywhere. And the dreams were about kudzu consuming things. Cars, buildings, you've probably seen this, right? People, consuming people. Nature sort of reasserting itself, you know. And if you know the story of kudzu, you know it was brought over for one reason and then something else happened. Then in 2016, as part of a project coordinated by the performative, non-governmental art initiative called the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, ask me later about that, I was one of the artists to respond to Dr. Martin Luther King's April 4th, 1967 Riverside speech when he said, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." Thinking about my experience in Port Gibson, I made these, well, there's the kudzu. I made these faux postcards. They're defunct monuments in my mind to racism, in this Confederate statue, to militarism, this tank, and to materialism from Wall Street, all being consumed by kudzu as I dreamed they should be. They made it out into the virtual world through regular channels and went up on the street places, but then something remarkable happened. A woman named Margot Smith, who I did not know before, and here she is, who lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, contacted me out of the blue, and not long after the terrible rally that had happened in her hometown. She had seen defunct Monument 1 of the Confederate statue, and she had an idea. In her email, she said, "I'm a knitter, and I participated in some group knitting projects, and were inspired by your artwork. And I've developed this idea for knitting a covering of kudzu leaves and vines for the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville. My idea is to pass this idea out through networks to knitting communities around the country and ask people to send their contributions to me. I'll work with local knitters to assemble them and create the installation." And thus was born the Kudzu Project, which is ongoing today and has done more than 20, I think, installations on all sorts of public monuments along with a really awesome website that talks about why they're doing it, why they're using the materials they're using, why they're choosing the sites that they're using, and so on. So I'm really grateful and proud to be associated with the work that these knitters have been doing around the country. So these postcards that I made, like the kudzu covered statues that Margot and her crew have been instigating, the Occupy posters, and really the community murals are viewed in the wild, on the street, and in public. They're not precious objects. They exist to communicate quickly and incisively in their natural habitats on walls and alleyways and utility poles. They are creatures that have escaped their online confines, Final Friday art walks, and art school critiques. On the street, we interact with them unmediated by curators, having to consider their meanings on our own as they fight for space and attention with concert posters, happy hour specials, and lost dogs. Encountering these ephemeral art gestures that share a people's history, that speak truth to power, that demand a change to the status quo, we're aware that someone has put them there for us to see. And they've risked something, they've been vulnerable to get their message out. They testify to untold and uncomfortable truths. They fight against the colonization of our commons by corporations, governments, and self-censors. They point to unseen possibilities, their calls to battle. They dream in public of a better future and of mutual aid. They remember our heroes. They celebrate today's struggle. They see through and translate doublespeak. They laugh at false prophets and false leaders. They question authority and demand accountability. They shout that guns have no place in our schools, that water is sacred, that no person is illegal, that war is not the answer. And they warn us that this is not a test. Thank you.
So if people have questions, feel free to just ask Dave.
Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, it seems like through your talk you mentioned two distinct avenues of art. One of which is these murals that are very community based and have a lot of input. And then we see some of these political posters or postcards or even the original paintings you talked about of the college president that seem to not ask permission or not have that community input, but both of these seem to be activism in their own ways. I just wanted to know what your thoughts on those avenues are and what pulls you in one direction or the other.
Yeah, great question. Well, I think you identified it really well. There's one component of the work that I do that is rooted in this community-based tradition, and I feel completely accountable and as a collaborator with the folks that I work with on those projects. But that's a very different thing than some of the other work that we saw, where they're a reflection of my personal beliefs and values. Sometimes those are married with a particular organization, a campaign, or a protest where I'm working with others to highlight or to condemn or to educate, but they are definitely much more my personal vision. But I think underlying both are my values and beliefs, and I talked about a little bit in my talk that these are really predicated on truth-telling, about asking hard questions in public. Some of the visionary
thinking and writing that Arlene Goldbart has done and others who I quoted. But I am very aware, and I'm glad you pointed it out, that there is overlap, for sure. And maybe the presentation makes them feel a little too distinct. But I am aware that there is a difference between the community-based stuff that I do and the stuff that originates, from me, where I'm not asking another person to collaborate with me or to judge what I've done or to accept it or not. Somebody else. Yeah.
What is the process like when you're in a community setting and you have multiple collaborators? What does that look like?
Well, we saw sort of what it looks like in some of the slides. And I'm not sure if you're getting at this, but one of the realities is that people don't always agree on little things and on big things. And that's one of the biggest challenges about doing this work. We were talking about it in class today. There's this tension between wanting to be honest, wanting to tell people's history, wanting to engage with hard stories, wanting to represent the community in ways that it hasn't been represented or in ways that in previous times it's been misrepresented. There's that, but there's also an understanding that when you ask anyone to participate in a project like this, there'll be folks who don't believe that's the best idea and would prefer something that would be, in their words often it comes out as, we don't want anything controversial. When you quickly realize when you're organizing a project like this that for some of those folks, everything is controversial. Except, the school mascot, which is probably the thing that is controversial, if you really look at it. So those kind of tensions are, somebody was asking me today, like, how do you deal with those challenges? And my response was that those challenges, we know we're going into that situation. And part of what we're doing is creating an atmosphere, an environment, and a process that allows folks to engage in those questions in a way that they maybe haven't done before. And I think art is a remarkable way of doing this, because you're not only having those arguments and conversations, you're having to work together to figure out how to represent them. It's not just having the argument. It's okay, we had the argument, now we got to make something. What's that going to look like? How do we do that? Can we come to some sort of agreement? Can we understand that sometimes we disagree and it's okay? So all of those things are actually built into that process. And that comes from my understanding from my mentors who come out of the community-based mural and public art movement. And books like this, a lot of these folks are still alive and still doing great work. There are lots of other folks who are doing a remarkable job in other media, not just murals, but in dance and theater. Rick Lowe with Project Row Houses in Houston is doing a whole other thing. So there are great artists doing this all around. Yeah.
What do you think it is about murals that draws artists that are also activists to the medium? Because I've noticed a common theme about a lot of artists that are activists using murals as a common medium.
Yeah, I think the most obvious thing is that they're accessible. They're on the street. They're not in a museum or a gallery. So the audience is anybody who's a passerby. You reach those folks. There's also something built into the tradition, I think, of mural making that, for reasons that I don't fully understand, culturally, they seem more accessible in their making and in their meaning. We're more apt to engage with interpreting or looking at a public mural, I think, a lot of times than we are going to an art gallery and looking at an art show and being like, I don't get it. Who is this artist? They're public art, right? They're the people's art. And even if you go back to, the murals in the cathedrals in Europe and even before then, those were public art of that time as well, because everyone was going to those churches and they represented their stories from that. And we're also collaborative, by the way. You know, lots of different hands were involved in the making of those frescoes, and people got to see them being made. That's probably another part of it. Is there's wonderful unmasking of art with murals, because for the most part, they're made right in front of you. You can see how they're created. You can meet the artist.